James Steinhubel, TVU, Business News, and Health and Wellbeing News. And today we're with Joan MacMillan of Cammac Learning Evolution.
Nailed it.
How are you doing?
Good, how are you?
Very well, very well.
Excellent.
So we're going to talk a lot about your business and yourself, but just give me a quick rundown of what Cammac Learning Evolution is.
Well, it is an organization, I guess a learning and development organization that focuses on professional development, personal development on the side of psychological well-being, mental well-being, psychological health and safety, kind of looking at putting the people back in the organization, focusing on that personal aspect again and helping people to do the same for themselves.
Mm-hmm. There's lots of very interesting things that I want to talk about. I want to talk about your psychological health and safety or mental health hazard analysis, and then also your course on emotional intelligence and involved decision making. But before I go there, your history and where you've come from is very interesting. So I think it really positions you well for your business. Now you were you worked in diamond mines.
Yes.
You've worked with very high powered engineering firms,
Mm-hmm.
and you were a university professor.
College.
Yeah. And so I want to talk a little bit about that whole combined experience. You were at Davik Mines?
Davik, yeah.
Davik Mines. What were you doing there?
I was in health and safety. So I actually, if I go back a tiny bit further than that,
Mm-hmm.
I graduated from, I had a physical education teaching degree, sports psychology master's, and then an athletic therapy degree. And I finished and was kind of, okay, well, what am I going to do now? Because I have a lot of student loans to pay off. And so that's actually how I wound up at Davik. I was brought on the health and wellness side of the organization.
And you have your master's at this point?
Yep. Yeah, in sports psychology though, like not in health and safety.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was brought in there and I started doing industrial hygiene and health and wellness challenges and that type of thing. And I really liked the safety side. I liked what the safety advisors were doing, and so I started just tagging along, and I eventually worked my way over there, got into emergency response while I was at the mine. And yeah, just kind of grew, I guess, my health and safety career from there. And then when my husband and I decided that we were going to have kids, I had to leave the mine and start working at home. And that's when I got into engineering and worked with construction, some oil and gas, and more on the corporate side of things. And then,
with health and safety?
Mm-hmm. Yep. At Davik, I was in the field. And then when I got here, I was on the corporate side. So I got a good taste of the field work plus the overarching systems. And then
Before we get to your college teaching, your professor at college, what kind, this is a very remote mine.
Mm-hmm.
This is not like, 40 miles from Edmonton. Describe where this mine is.
Oh gosh, I want to say it's about like 250 kilometers north of Yellowknife, if I'm not mistaken, and I might be. But it's a fly in, fly out, and it's its own remote island. So it's one of the mines that uses the ice roads. And yeah, it is remote. But I mean, I grew up in Labrador, so I know remote, right? I worked at the mine. I drove haul trucks at home, and so I understood mining, I guess, and I understood remote. But this was different. I mean, my first rotation up there. Did I call my mom and dad crying, saying I wanted to come home? Maybe. Did they tell me I had to stick it out? Right? So it was definitely something to get used to. But I don't know. I guess because it's such a small, remote place, and the only people up there are the people in camp who work there. You kind of build relationships pretty quick.
Now, with a little foreshadow into your the course, the emotional intelligence and involved decision making. When you think of that time,
Mm-hmm.
what stands out in that context? We're talking like this is a set community.
Mm-hmm.
You guys are isolated. You're there, so there's got to be so much that you learned there. Not about diamond mining, but what you're doing now.
Yeah, there was definitely some. I mean, certainly there were not a lot of women there, right? You're in this man's world, which is pretty much what health and safety is. And so looking back at it now, with what I know now about myself and everything, I think I definitely, my entire life, worked hard to keep up with the boys, right? Prove that I could do what the boys are doing. That carried over there for sure. Another thing was noticing some of those biases that we don't like to talk about, you know, women being paid less than men and all this kind of stuff. And that was the first time I ever was hit with that, right? I always used to think, well, work hard and do your job and you'll be able to do it all. And, you know, found out that I was in that situation and had to approach our management team about it. And so that was a big learning for me. Up until that point, I probably was on the opposite side of the table of most of the perspectives that I have right now. Yeah, it was a big learning. And
now with the engineering, now you talk about irrational, we're talking about conflicts, irrational behavior and unresolved conflicts. And when you're in a big engineering firm, that's pretty well what's happening every day.
Yeah.
So you learned lots there too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, definitely on the commercial, I guess, or not commercial, sorry, on the organizational side of things, right? So when you're in the field, it's one thing because you're just doing what all of the plans say, you're doing what all the programs say, and you're just, right, you're keeping up with it. But when you're on that other side, you're developing it all. And so you've got to figure out why you're doing what you're doing. And I do remember certainly being there, and by the time I left, having a few project managers who I really liked to work with because they got it, right? They understood health and safety. They understood that if we put this time into the people up front, then we could actually save a lot of time and money and incidents on our projects. And I loved working with those people because it just made sense and they got it and it was easy.
Now, your time at NAIT, your reviews are very interesting. The best and the strictest is what I kind of thought, which you normally get the worst and strictest, but you get the best and strictest. So you've put a lot together in terms of all the dynamics that we're going to get to quickly here when you're at NAIT. You know, it seems like you were able to walk in that very stressful environment with it as a positive light.
Yeah. NAIT was hard for me because it was hard for me to feel where I fit, because it's, I don't know if white collar is the right word, but it's, you know, it's a professional setting, and I mean, I'm a minor, you know, in the heart, and so I was uncomfortable because I didn't know how much of me I could bring, right? It took me about a year to figure that out, year and a half or so. And then once I was able to be myself, I realized that I could hold the students accountable in a way that was fair, in that they knew what the expectations were up front. I was willing to help them meet those expectations, and I was willing to work with them if they were struggling, but these were the expectations and you're going to be held accountable to them. And I think that's where the strict comes from, right? In the fact that, you know, if somebody screwed up and made a mistake, and they ended up getting a 0 because they screwed up and made a mistake, well, they got their 0. Now, did I empathize with them? Always. And, you know, I would tell them, like, don't let this really get you down. I know it sucks, and I know you're probably mad at me right now. I get that, but you made a mistake, right? We all make mistakes. We're all human. That's just part of the learning. So just learn from it. Pick up, move on. You're still going to pass. You know, you can still do this. And I think maybe that's where that came from, is the fact that I genuinely care about my students. I care about them, and I want to help them, and I want to help them succeed. And I don't think that not holding them accountable to life is helping them succeed, because then they're going to get out into maybe a workforce or anything else, and you know, and people are going to hold them accountable, and they're going to say, what, right? But I didn't mean it. Well, unfortunately, it doesn't matter if you meant it. You made the mistake. So let's learn from it. Let's talk about it. You know, let's don't feel bad about it. Don't feel shame about it. Let's just move on. And I did. I had high expectations for people, but I was always willing to put the effort into to help them get there, and they did.
And it's, you know, you have athletic therapy, so you have this nurturing, recovering, you know, sort of push people, you know, into their health kind of approach. Then you have a master's in psychology and sports psychology, so there's a lot of yeah, it's the internal motivation, but it's succeeding in a competitive environment.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have developmental psychology. That's what you're studying right now to get for your Ph.D. Very interesting combination of education that leads us to Cammac Learning Evolution. Such an interesting business.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I love going to work every day.
So who are your contact points in companies? Like when you're presenting your business to decision makers, but when you're actually now working with a company, who are you working with?
Right now, more so people who are in those higher level management or leadership positions. So I've got a few clients who are just, not necessarily struggling with their team to the point of, we've got these big disciplinary issues or anything, but just struggling in the sense that like they know something's not right. They know that there's just a disconnect, and some are HR people I'm working with, and some health and safety people. Because I think the issue right now is that a lot of the disconnection or the tension or the anxiety or whatever it is that we're feeling in our groups is coming from underlying psychological issues. Nobody wants to talk about them though, because psychology is uncomfortable and mental health is uncomfortable. And so nobody wants to sit and have those conversations. But if we don't start having the conversations, then we're just going to keep seeing, turnover in organizations, and we're going to keep seeing people taking sick leave and absenteeism and short-term disability and suicides, for that matter, right? If we look at construction and the suicide numbers that we've seen in construction over the past few years. So we have to start talking about these things now. The issue is that we have to have some human behavior psychology expertise. To have these conversations, because they're not easy conversations to have.
I like and I wasn't aware of this, the CSA Standard for psychological health and safety in the workplace to promote mental health and well-being and prevent harm. That this is actually a CSA standard, that's pretty important.
It is. It's hugely important. I think that it's going to be, the way that I look at health and safety is, safety kind of crept its way up over time, right? We had the legislation that started changing because we started recognizing, well, it's not okay to kill people anymore, right? We don't want to. So we started seeing more legislation and more accountability and more programs and systems and everything else. And then over the past, I don't know, let's call it maybe 20 years, we've started seeing health and hygiene creeping up that same way. Things like asbestos and silica and chemical exposure. And so now we're starting to see those creep up. And if you actually look at the fatality stats in Alberta, I'm going to guess everywhere in Canada, I haven't looked at them, but I would guess the trend is the same. You'll notice that half of our fatalities almost every year are from occupational disease, right? So from people who were exposed years and years and years ago, and their chronic disease is now, fatal
on them, yeah.
So I foresee the same thing now happening with psychological health and safety, in that it is now going to start to kind of, jump in there and do that same type of thing that safety did, and then hygiene did, and now psychological health and mental health, or psychological safety and mental health will start to do the same, because I think that we've done a really good job with our engineering controls and our administrative controls and our legislation. And I think that we're starting to do a really good job with our industrial hygiene monitoring and our sampling plans and exposure groups. But we're not doing a good job with mental health, because it never used to matter like it matters now. It was part of the job, right? Well, yeah, it's going to be stressful. It's going to be dangerous. Go to work.
It's such the epiphany, in a sense, that a decision maker would have to make this decision to move forward. Has to be very difficult for them.
Oh yeah.
Because, pardon my lack of proper psychological terms, but they're dealing with the other, right? So you're there asking some very hard questions that they would, I think, have an innate difficulty of actually looking at, because it would challenge them on so many levels. And I like, can the leader demonstrate how they're promoting health and well-being? Are they actively working to prevent psychological harm? And are they avoiding reckless and intentional behaviors on dealing with difficult and incompatible issues? That's like you're unpacking them hard with just those first three questions.
Well, I think that's what the issue is. I think everybody wants to get engaged with psychological health and safety. I think everybody understands the necessity.
But as the decision maker, you have your own weaknesses.
But that's what's so scary, right? Because the idea is like, yeah, we want to do it. We know how important it is. We believe in it. But we don't really know how to do it. And what if I look bad? What if I look like I don't care? What if the
I have too many of these errors.
What if the decisions that I'm making are leading to psychological health and safety issues? Well, yeah, you're gonna find that, right? And I think that's really the key is when we start doing this work, when we start unpacking, yeah, you're gonna find that you made mistakes. Of course you are. And so is that person, so is that person, so is that person, because we are human. And that is the biggest humanism that we have, is that we make mistakes, because without making mistakes, we can't grow. So your choices are either you accept the fact that, yeah, you're gonna have to maybe sit back and reflect a little bit and say, has anything I've been doing led to this? And that's, I guess, where I come in to be able to help steer those conversations so that people don't feel like
this is your mental health hazard analysis.
That would be, tied into that. I think that before you can get into a mental health hazard analysis, you really have to have your leadership team who's going to be involved in this. You've got to have them trained and versed and having kind of gone through the rabbit hole themselves before, because otherwise it's going to be very difficult for people to be vulnerable, for people to be honest, for people to be accepting of what's going to come out of that mental health hazard analysis, right? So I think where you want to start is starting by getting everybody on that level of the fact that mental health, it impacts all of us, that we all make mistakes, we all do good, we're kind of in this human soup together, right? Where all of our actions and decisions impact everybody around us. And if we haven't made awesome ones and they've led to some mental health struggle for workers, well, yeah, that sucks, but we're here to make sure that doesn't keep happening. So like, pat yourself on the back. That's a big step forward. That's one decision. Otherwise, you make the decision to say, yeah, we probably need to do this, but I don't really want to look bad in this. And so we'll just ignore it for a little while longer. And workers continue to suffer. And you can continue to see, as we see, like the turnover and the resignations and the mental health illness.
Because as you push that balance and have started to establish, if there was imbalance in the leadership team, they're gonna need extra care too, right?
Yeah.
Psychological health and safety training, you have courses. You have a course, the emotional intelligence and evolved decision making.
Yes. So this one is kind of like my company baby because I spent about a year, doing the research and the development and putting it all together, and I had to get help with the actual putting it together in a digital platform because that is not my forte. I tried. And yeah, it's just an asynchronous course, so a course that you can do on your own time. You can take your time to go through it at whatever pace you need, but it comes with some reflection activities that I guide you through so that you can actually put the learning into play, right? So that you can actually make sense of, when am I making impulsive decisions? What does that feel like? When am I making intentional or well thought out decisions? What does that feel like? What type of practice do I need to do to get to more of those intentional thought out decisions instead of relying on, our impulse brain, which we all do way more than we want to admit. And it, I think, just gives you the underlying knowledge of why you're doing the things you're doing, right? And how all of those decisions that we're making and the resultant actions either lead us to a place of good or a place of not so good. And when we get to the place of not so good, again, that's okay because we're human, right? But now let's just step back and look at it and say, where did I go wrong in that kind of decision-making process so that we can start to build those neural pathways in our brains to veer us toward making intentional decisions more often.
Mm-hmm. And that goes to the topics. You have the nervous system, brain, decision making, decision strategies, and I label this decisioning to move forward.
Yeah, kind of where can I go from here? So now I've taken this course and I know what I know now. What can I do to now move forward with this, right? I don't want to just give people this aha. It's kind of like getting that aha moment of like, oh, okay, so I've got a lot of baggage, right? So you're telling me I've got a lot of baggage, I got a lot of baggage. Okay, see ya, right? Have fun with that. I don't want to do that, and so we just break it down into just little bite-sized pieces. This course in particular really deals with being able to pause those impulse thoughts that we have, right? So helping you to build the capacity to just pause your impulses, which is, it's hard if you don't practice it. And it builds on how to regulate emotions a little bit so that we stop emotionally reacting to things. So those are the two little, pieces of emotional intelligence that this course focuses on. And it does it in a way that when you're leaving, you've got these actionable takeaways that you can put into your daily habits to start you on your way to just making better decisions.
Okay, so people, they're watching, they're gonna, look at your website and they're gonna contact you. What can they expect from there? Like, so now what's gonna happen?
Well, I've got some, people can reach out to me on my website. My email is on there as well, but I've got the option to do a half-hour consulting session so that we can actually just talk. And because oftentimes when we're talking about, psychological health and safety, or if you're talking about that personal development or anything, lots of times people know that they need something, but they're not quite sure where they need to go with it. And so by having that, it's a free half hour, let's just talk about you, talk about your needs, then it can help put some perspective around the steps forward that would actually help them. And recognizing that organizationally, I don't need to be part of every single step, right? So a lot of organizations can do a lot of the upfront work of getting ready to implement like a psychological health and safety program or something like that. They can do some of that on their own, but it's really stepping through those parts where they would probably benefit from having somebody there who's got that psychological and human behavior background. So just kind of seeing where they're at, meeting them where they're at, and kind of moving forward from that place. And if they don't know exactly where that is, that's okay, right? Because after we get through the conversation, I'll typically have a pretty good idea of, what that next step might look like.
And so what kind of time, is a company looking at investing to, you have to meet with the main decision maker, and then the top 6 or 7 or 3 or 2 that's everything in the organization, and now you're dealing with your junior management and your staff. What kind of, is it a daily thing, a weekly thing, a monthly thing? What are they looking at for you to come in here?
Yeah, I mean, it's not going to happen fast, and I think that's the other issue with it, right? First issue is the fact that nobody wants to unpack that box because it's it's an emotionally full box, and that's scary for a lot. And the second issue is that it requires time, right? And that we cannot create sustainable or meaningful behavioral change unless we take time to do it. So if anybody is hoping to implement, for example, the CSA Standard, okay, if anybody's hoping to just grab that CSA Standard, which tells you how you can implement, and just say, okay, good, now we're good, that's just not how it's going to work, right? We've actually got to dig into human behavior. We've got to dig into the underlying psychological issues of human interaction, right? Me and you, that create tension, that create despair, that create depression, that create anxiety, that create all of these things. We've got to dig into those, because if we don't actually impact the human behavior, well then, just putting another system in isn't going to cut it.
So you're coming like in 2-hour bites, or?
Kind of. I think you see it as, it's something that I would suggest continues on in implementation phase for a year. And something that kind of on a monthly basis, maybe a little bit more upfront when you're doing that training, like I was saying, when you're having those talks, those discussions, and getting everyone ready for it. And then something that happens a little bit less frequently as time goes on, to the point that hopefully by the time we get to the end of the year, the organization is self-managing in this stuff, right?
So what does that look like? We'll wrap up with that. So a company's they've gone through the mental health hazard analysis, they've got the recommendations, they're they've gone through the implementation. Of course, there's always dynamic changes, but what's at the end result for them? Or the flowing, simultaneous interactions? What's happening?
Well, I think what people struggle with in psychological health and safety is like, how do we measure it, right? Because we look at it and say, okay, well, how do we tell if people are more well, or if, people's mental health is better? And that's very difficult. Even in the world of psychology, that's really difficult, right? So I think that what people would be better to do would be to look at, okay, what are the results of psychological ill health at the organization? Well, we have all the research to tell us that those results are things like absenteeism and turnover and sick days. I'm trying to think. Oh, LTIs, like your incidents and your MTCs. All of these trends that we all trend. Everybody trends these and they get their numbers. But what do they do with them, right? The research is very clear in the whole, if we treat people better, people will work harder. If we treat people better, people want to come to work, right? Yes. If we care about people, people care about us. That's basic, human interaction. And so if we do this, and if we put this time into fixing the human interaction part of it, which is really what it comes down to, then hopefully at the end of the year, when we do some repeat measures, you're going to see all of those things have improved. And so that's where I genuinely believe, because obviously I've done research in the organizational side of things, because that's kind of where I started my Ph.D. before I shifted to developmental. But obviously my experience is health and safety. And so based on what I've read, based on the dots I've connected in the research, I genuinely and very firmly believe that if an organization were to put this psychological health and safety program into practice, I believe that is what is going to create that kind of downward trend again in incidents and in people getting hurt at the workplace, because it's just been plateauing and stagnant for years. Why? I think it's because we have just gotten so far removed from the humans that that it's just hanging out there. It's
so interesting. It's been such a delight to meet you and visit and to interview you. And James Steiner will TV you on health and wellness and business with Joan MacMillan of Cammac Learning Evolution. Thank you.
Thank you.